With 4 full months of the 2018-19 NBA regular season now behind us, fans and pundits alike have a pretty solid grasp on what each and every team within the league is at this point as we move closer to the stretch run of the league's long and, sometimes, arduous schedule. With that being the case, Colin Ward-Henninger of CBS Sports has put together a list featuring the biggest disappointment for every team to this point in the season, and, as you can see, there are already some major regrets out there that teams will have to overcome if they want to reach the heights they thought were possible at the beginning of the year. What do you think of CBS Sports' list? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. The Hawks took a gamble on draft night by trading the rights to Luka Doncic to the Mavericks for the rights to Trae Young and a 2019 first-rounder, the logic being that if Young and Doncic were close to equal, the extra draft pick would make the deal worth it. So far Doncic has been much better than Young, but that's expected given Doncic's professional experience. What wasn't expected, however, is that Young would struggle as mightily as he has from the three-point line. He's shot 24% from deep, dead last among players with at least 100 attempts. Celtics entered the season with a healthy roster full of talented players, and most assumed at least one of them would suffer as a result. So far, that player has been Brown. After a breakout 2017-18 campaign in which he became one of team's primary postseason scorers out of necessity, Brown's numbers have fallen off a cliff. It's not just the scoring, which logically would drop given the return of Gordon Hayward. Brown's efficiency has been horrible. His field goal shooting has dropped from 46.5% last season to 40.9% this season, and his three-point shooting has gone from nearly 40% last year to 28% this year. The Nets have managed to put together a solid roster despite a well-documented lack of draft picks over the past few seasons, and LeVert looked like a potential franchise cornerstone to start the season, averaging 18.4 points, 4.3 rebounds and 3.7 assists on 48% field goal shooting. Unfortunately, LeVert suffered a horrific ankle injury against the Timberwolves in the team's 14th game, and while the diagnosis isn't as bad as most feared after seeing the play, he's still having to work his way back into form while the Nets try to lock up a playoff spot, which could be difficult. Optimists hoped that Batum would emerge as a true second option in what could be Kemba Walker's final season in Charlotte, but so far he's continued to underwhelm. Batum's three-point shooting has improved, but his 38% on 3.5 attempts per game is hardly enough to move the needle. He's averaging 9.1 points per game, which would be the lowest since his rookie season, and his assists have dropped from 5.5 last season to 3.5 this year. The expectations weren't set too high for Batum, but he's still managed to disappoint, making the $76.7 million he's owed from now until the end of the 2020-21 season even uglier. Cavs owner Dan Gilbert reportedly believed that his team had a chance to make the playoffs in a post-LeBron world, but that journey was stopped dead in its tracks before it could even roll out of the station. Love, who was expected to lead the James-less Cleveland defense in a throwback to his glory days with the Minnesota Timberwolves, suffered a left foot injury which has kept him out of all but the first 4 games of the season. Without Kevin Love, the Cavs have been awful, firing Tyronn Lue, trading Kyle Korver and George Hill and banishing J.R. Smith. This likely isn't what Gilbert envisioned when Cleveland signed Love to a 4-year, $120 million extension this offseason. The Mavericks organization has significant off-court issues that are much more important than anything basketball-related, but we'll stick to on-court disappointments for this one. That being said, there's really not much to complain about from an overachieving Dallas squad with a rookie who looks like he could be a future MVP in Luka Doncic. Their young players have progressed and their veterans have found their roles. The only thing they can really be disappointed in so far is the fact that they might not make the playoffs due to a stacked Western Conference. Out east they'd likely be a lock, but despite a strong start they still find themselves outside the West playoff standings. Denver was expected to improve this season, but not many had them atop the Western Conference 30 games into the season. Amazingly, the Nuggets have managed to do this without their full complement of players. Will Barton has only played 2 games, Isaiah Thomas hasn't played at all, and both Gary Harris and Paul Millsap are going to miss significant time. The Nuggets have persevered despite all that, thanks to the brilliance of Nikola Jokic, the coaching of Mike Malone and the emergence of young players like Jamal Murray, Monte Morris, Juancho Hernan-Gomez and Malik Beasley. Still, it's going to be hard for them to continue to stay atop the West without a healthy roster. After a hot start, the Pistons have come back down to earth a bit, and it looks like they'll be fighting for a playoff spot for the rest of the season. Blake Griffin has put up MVP-type numbers in a knock-on-wood, healthy season so far, and Andre Drummond is his normal, dominant inside presence, but the team has to be disappointed in Jackson's play. If Jackson could emerge as a third star, or even something close to it, the Pistons could be interesting. Instead, Jackson's field goal percentage has dropped to under 40% as he continues to fail to live up to the 5-year, $80 million contract he signed a few years ago. Defensively, the Pistons have been much worse with Jackson on the court, 117.8 defensive rating, compared to 103.7, which has hurt the team under new coach Dwayne Casey so far this season. The Warriors came into the season as overwhelming favorites to three-peat and win their 4th NBA title in 5 years, with the traditional thinking being, the only way the Warriors will lose is if they beat themselves. Well, fast forward to November 12, when Draymond Green decided not to pass Kevin Durant the ball on the final possession of regulation, and all hell broke loose for the champs. Green reportedly brought up Durant's free agency. Durant was clearly hurt and offended. Green was suspended. Steve Kerr said the team was exhausted spiritually. Now, no matter how well the Warriors play for the rest of the season, the incident and how it will affect Durant's impending decision to stay or go will hang over their heads all the way through the finals. Assuming they can once again make it that far, you can't blame the entirety of Houston's disappointing start on Carmelo Anthony, but it certainly didn't help matters. Some thought that joining his buddy Chris Paul in Houston would unlock the mythical, Olympic Melo that OKC failed to get last season, but it was clear after just a few games that Anthony just couldn't thrive in the Rockets system. He shot a paltry 33% from the three-point line and was targeted relentlessly on defense for 10 games before Houston threw up the white flag and announced it was parting ways with the 10-time All-Star. He's still on the roster, so maybe LeBron will get desperate enough to bring him to LA that he forces the Lakers into trading a modest asset for him. Otherwise, the experiment will go down as a total failure. The Pacers are in the upper echelon of Eastern Conference teams, so not much has gone poorly so far. Victor Oladipo is playing at the all-star level we got used to seeing last season. Miles Turner has improved on both ends of the floor, and Domantas Sabonis has emerged as a 6th Man of the Year candidate. The biggest disappointment, however, has been Tyreke Evans, whom the Pacers signed to a 1-year, $12.4 million contract this offseason to bolster their bench. Evans averaged 19.4 points last season with the Grizzlies, the most since his rookie year, and shot a career-high 40% on three-pointers. This season he's been borderline bad, averaging 10.4 points on 36% field goals, including 34% threes. His playmaking has also suffered, as he's nearly averaging as many turnovers, 2.0, as assists, 2.4. The Pacers can get by during the regular season because of their depth, but they signed Evans to be a guy who could go get them baskets, and so far he hasn't been able to do that efficiently. The Clippers got off to a red-hot start and appeared to have mastered the whole is greater than the sum of its parts ethos to perfection. But just as the team began to struggle for the first time this season, they were dealt a huge blow when reigning 6th Man of the Year Lou Williams went down with a hamstring injury. They've lost all 4 games without their go-to-clutch scorer, and 7 of their last 9. Sweet Lou is expected to be back around Christmas, but the Clippers back in action Thursday night, 10:30 p.m. ET. Watch on Fubo TV. With the NBA League Pass extension, have dropped some valuable games without him as they attempt to stay in the Western Conference playoff picture. Ingram lost 4 games to suspension and the Lakers' last 7 to an ankle injury, but he has failed to emerge as the elusive second option to LeBron James in Los Angeles. Most felt Ingram would take a step forward this season under James's tutelage, but the 21-year-old's scoring has dropped, while his three-point percentage has fallen from 39% last season to 32% this year. We all know it takes a while to get used to playing with LeBron, particularly for young players, but Ingram has thus far failed to live up to expectations. There's a chance he'll improve, but will LeBron and the Lakers front office be patient enough to wait and see? The gritty group of overachievers from Memphis has impressed so far, but they've done it without any significant on-court contributions from Parsons, who has only played 3 games this season due to knee and back injuries. Chandler Parsons hasn't been able to stay remotely healthy after signing a 4-year, $94.4 million contract with the Grizzlies before the 2016-17 season, but there was at least some hope that he'd be able to offer a modicum of help this year. That hasn't been the case, however, which is really a shame, because Memphis could definitely use the three-point shooting and playmaking abilities he displayed before his career was derailed by injuries. This is a pretty general complaint, but Miami has just had serious trouble putting the ball in the basket so far this season, and it's likely going to get worse with Goran Dragic undergoing knee surgery. Miami is 25th in the NBA in offensive efficiency, 105.6, and dead last in field goal percentage, 43.2. They've been riddled with injuries, but overall the roster just lacks the offensive pop necessary to compete in the modern NBA. That being said, Eric Spoelstra is such a good coach that they might just make the playoffs anyway. There's not a lot to take issue with for a Milwaukee team that looks poised to compete for the No. 1 seed in the East, but if you have to nitpick, you can start with the atrocious three-point shooting from Giannis Antetokounmpo through the first 30 games or so. He got up to 30% last year, and there was some hope that he would continue to improve, especially in Mike Budenholzer's confidence-inspiring, three-point-heavy offense. Instead, Giannis is shooting 12.5% from deep, not a typo, making just 8 of 64 attempts. Nobody has come even close to shooting under 20% on more than 2 three-point attempts per game for a full season in the history of the NBA, and Giannis is shooting 12.5% on 2.4 attempts per game. He's probably the MVP frontrunner despite the horrific outside shooting, so this really isn't a big deal, but imagine what he could do to the league if he somehow got that percentage up into the mid-30s. The Wolves have played some decent basketball this season. Now imagine if they didn't start the year getting 36 minutes per game from a player who didn't want to be on the team. The front office, led by head coach Tom Thibodeau, let an explosive situation reach near catastrophe by failing to trade Butler before the season began. As a result, both Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins got off to shaky starts before the team finally pulled the trigger and brought in Robert Covington and Dario Saric. The Wolves have moved on from Butler, but it would have been nice to have had a fresh start to begin the season. The biggest disappointment for Pelicans fans before the season was Anthony Davis signing with Clutch Sports, the same agency that reps LeBron James, but on the court, Payton's injury problems have been rough. He's only played 6 games this season due to an ankle injury and, most recently, a broken finger, but he averaged 9.7 points, 5.3 assists, and 5.2 rebounds in those games, while shooting 43% on three-pointers. The Pelicans desperately need someone to fill in the role that Rajon Rondo played so well last season, and Payton could at least be serviceable. Instead, the Pelicans are left with Drew Holiday as the only impact ball handler, no offense, Tim Frazier, and Davis is forced to shoulder an unfathomable load on both ends of the court. It's hard to disappoint when expectations are as low as they are in New York. The The biggest disappointment would be if they were winning, causing them to potentially miss out on the Zion Williamson sweepstakes. Fortunately for Knicks fans, the team is awful, and the only thing you can really point to as a disappointment is the lack of development of Ntilikina so far. The 20-year-old had a chance to take control of the offense early in the season, but his poor play caused head coach David Fizdale to cut his minutes practically in half. The rangy combo guard is seen as a potential supporting piece for Kristaps Porzingis down the road, but he hasn't done much so far this season to cement himself into the Knicks' future. OKC has dominated defensively, with the best rating in the NBA, 101.7, so it's hard to imagine how good they would be on that side of the ball with perennial Defensive Player of the Year candidate Andre Roberson healthy. The 27-year-old wing suffered a brutal, season-ending injury in January, and has since had two separate setbacks that have delayed his return. With the Thunder sitting toward the top of the Western Conference standings, they'll be patient and hope Roberson is fully healthy for the playoff run, but it would have been amazing to see that defense at work from the start of the season. It's probably a good sign for the Magic that the biggest disappointment 30 games into the season involves Fournier, and not, say, Aaron Gordon or Jonathan Isaac. Fournier, whose main purpose on the court is to stretch the defense with his shooting, has struggled so far this season, making just 31% of his three-pointers after coming in as a 37% career shooter from distance. He's actually 9th on the team in percentage, just behind Wesley Iwundu and just ahead of Isaac and Jonathan Simmons, not where you want your sharpshooter to be. This likely just means Fournier is due for a hot streak, but he's been the biggest disappointment so far on an Orlando team that currently finds itself in playoff position. No surprise here, as whatever optimism about Markelle Fultz fixing his shooting problems over the offseason went out the window almost immediately. He double-pumped a free throw, tried out a peculiar pitter-patter approach from the line, then went to get his shoulder evaluated just after falling out of the rotation following the Butler trade. It really is a sad situation, and you can only hope that Fultz gets back on his feet after rehabbing from his diagnosis of thoracic outlet syndrome. It just won't be with the Sixers as the team shipped him out of town at the trade deadline. The Blazers earned a surprising number 3 seed in the Western Conference last season, partly due to a 6th-ranked defense, but that has taken a major slip this year. While their offense is clicking behind Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, scoring 111.3 points per 100 possessions, the defense is 18th in the NBA with a 109.8 rating. The team replaced minutes from capable bench defenders Ed Davis, Pat Connaughton and Shabazz Napier with not-so-capable defenders like Nick Stauskas, Seth Curry and Jake Layman, so that could help explain the defensive drop-off. The Blazers remain in the hunt for a top playoff seed, though, and if they get their defense back on track they'll be dangerous once again. The Kings are already well on their way to smashing the preseason Vegas over-under total of 26 wins, but since this is Sacramento's there have to be some strings attached. Those strings come in the form of a reported feud between head coach Dave Joerger and the front office, specifically assistant general manager Brandon Williams. Joerger was reportedly on the hot seat despite the team's excellent start because of the way he was doling out minutes to rookie Marvin Bagley III and other young players on the team. Things only got worse last week, when Joerger heaped praise upon Luka Doncic, whom the front office passed on to take Bagley. Overall, this has been about as good of a season as the Kings could ask for on the court, so it's disappointing that there has to be some drama to sully a great NBA story. Before a recent stretch of 5 straight games holding opponents under 100 points, the Spurs had the 29th-ranked defense in the NBA. Let that sink in for a second. A Greg Popovich-led Spurs team was almost last in the league in defense. A big reason for that is the absence of Murray, an All-NBA defender who was lost for the season when he tore his ACL during a preseason game. San Antonio replaced two-time Defensive Player of the Year, Kawhi Leonard and the always stout Danny Green with DeMar DeRozan, not exactly a defensive stalwart, so Murray was expected to pick up the slack. Without him the Spurs have struggled defensively, but at least that now appears to be trending in the right direction. Kawhi Leonard is an MVP candidate. Kyle Lowry is toward the top of the league in assists. Raptors have the best record in the NBA. What is there to be disappointed about? There's always a fear in any professional sports league about peaking too early, but that rings especially true for the Raptors, who have put together 5 straight impressive regular seasons, only to end in heartbreak and devastation in the playoffs. So for Toronto fans, the calendar can't move quickly enough. They need everyone to stay healthy and productive as they try to exorcise the postseason demons that haunt the city. With how well this team has started the season, the only disappointing thing is that they can't enter the playoffs tomorrow. During last season's monster run after the return of Rudy Gobert to the lineup in January, the Jazz had a near top 10 offense to pair with their suffocating defense. This year the defense has slipped a bit, but they've taken a plunge on offense to 24th in the NBA. So far Donovan Mitchell hasn't made the leap that most expected, while Ricky Rubio's three-point shooting has come back down below his career average of 32% after he shot 35% last season, and the offense has suffered as a result. Utah finds itself below .500 and outside the playoffs after being expected to challenge for a top 3 seed, so they'll need another impressive turnaround if they want to make that happen. The Wizards are a complete mess, sitting well outside the playoff picture even in a weak Eastern Conference, and things are only exacerbated when you look at the 4-year, $170 million extension that Wall signed in 2017 that doesn't even kick in until next season. Wall is putting up decent numbers, but his three-point shooting has been awful at 31% and the team is clearly lost right now. You'd have to think that trading Wall is on the table, but it's probably going to be hard to find a team willing to pay him $46.8 million in the 2022-23 season. Yikes.